Welcome to I'm Not Joking, the podcast where a behavioral scientist examines what it's like to live a humorous life. Glimpse into the lives of the funniest people in entertainment, business, and science as your host, Dr. Peter McGraw, explores their habits, motivations, and secrets to success. Get ready to fire up your brain and your funny bone. Now, here's your host.
Welcome to a special dual taping of I'm Not Joking, the podcast that looks at the lives of funny people.
And a special recording of the Here We Are podcast, science podcast, hosted by comedian Shane Mauss.
That's Shane Mauss.
And that's Peter McGraw.
Yes, we're going to introduce each other to our respective listeners.
Ooh.
And this podcast coincides with the launch of my new book, Shtick to Business, What the Masters of Comedy Can Teach You About Breaking Rules, Being Fearless, and Building a Serious Career. You can find out about it on my website, petermcgraw.org, or just go to Amazon. Give Amazon your money.
They need it. They need all the help they can get.
So since there'll be more listeners for Here We Are, maybe you should start with the introduction of who I am.
Sure. Why not? This is my oldest scientist friend.
Wait, hold on. Not in age, but in time known.
Well, you're a very old man. In time known. So when I got interested in science, almost like 10 years ago, I was always reading science, but when I got obsessed and wanted to actually integrate science into my comedy, I started reaching out to some authors that I liked, and they were like, hey, do you know... you might be interested in talking with some people researching humor. And through a series of emails, I eventually got connected with Peter McGraw, and we just happened to be both at the same comedy festival. Peter himself was just getting into the world of studying comedy. I was trying to put science into comedy. We met, and it would have been an unjust world if we never would have met, right? And so I met Peter. Peter is a business professor, and he also is a humor researcher. He wrote a book called The Humor Code, which I like more than he does. And so this book, Shtick to Business, he actually asked me to contribute some sections because it's business lessons from the world of comedy. And so I have like little anecdotes and little observations I've made in the course of my career that are applicable to some of the lessons that you're learning in the book. And so that's why we're kind of doing this dual podcast.
Yeah, it's fun. So when we were prepping for this, I was trying to figure out how long I knew Shane. And I was like, well, when was it that you were fat?
I was never fat.
And you're like, I was never fat. My face was fat.
My face was bloated from alcohol.
Yes.
Yeah, from alcoholism. Now I weighed the exact same I do today, which is too little. And so I had, which really, you get that shirt off. If you have a big red fat alcoholic face and then you take your shirt off and you're just like skin and bones, that really, it exaggerates both in a negative way.
So your face is nice and thin these days, thankfully.
Yeah.
So Shane, so as he said, we've known each other for nearly 10 years, and he's a stand-up comedian who specializes in science. He has 2 touring shows. He is a road comic. He's a homeless road comic.
Home free.
One by choice.
I live in Airbnbs. I'm a in your home comic. Where do I live? I live with you, listener.
So one of the shows is called Stand Up Science. I've done it. It's fantastic. It's a half comedy, half science show.
Yeah.
It's like the world's funniest TED Talk.
Yeah, it's half comedy sets and half science talks, and it's blended together.
And then the second one, which is a special version of Stand Up Science, is called Head Talks.
Yeah, it's a psychedelic version.
Yes. And you can find Shane in the recent documentary film, Psychonautics.
A comic's exploration of psychedelics.
And that's on Amazon Prime?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's where I watch it.
Talked with all the top psychedelic researchers and then did a bunch of drugs.
Yes. He tried to do all the psychedelics.
Yeah. Cut short by doing too many psychedelics.
And more than half of you will know this. He hosts Here We Are, the science podcast. So we're going to give you a little. This is launching on I'm Not Joking on April 1st on the launch date of the book.
I just realized that your bad at self-deprecate. Like when you self-deprecate, like, oh, more than half of you will be listening to the Here We Are podcast, or like when you do it,
so
it's just sad and real. Like comedians use self-deprecation. It's like, hey, look at me, aren't I a dummy? And you're like, hey, that's funny. And but when you do it, it's like, oh, come on, cheer up, bud.
It's okay. That's really funny. I need to. It's so actually that's a perfect segue.
Yeah.
So the way the book is laid out is, as Shane mentioned, he has these sections. We call it Shtick with Shane. And we have a little Shtick figure of Shane in there. And so each chapter is built around a lesson. And then in it are the sort of comedic anecdotes and stories, as well as the takeaway for the business person, and then business cases that illustrate this principle in action. And so one of the things that I write about is turning a bug into a feature. And so that some of that came from my observations of self-deprecation.
Yeah.
So, I go to a lot of stand-up shows, less now than I used to. I'm a little bored of it all, but
hey, comedians don't go to comedy
That's
shows.
true.
When's the last time? I went to see my friend Rachel Feinstein recently because we happened to be in the same town, and I hadn't seen her in years, and we've had a special connection. We recorded our Comedy Central Presents on the same night. She used to stay in my extra room back when I was living in Malibu sometimes, and I hadn't seen her in years. And so that is to say, it takes a very special circumstance for me to go and see a comedy show when I'm off the clock.
I'll give you an example. I don't attend my colleagues' lectures.
Yeah.
I get it. I do enough lecturing.
Yeah.
So, but what a comic will often do, more often than not, is the first thing that they will say, or among the first things that they will say, is they will make fun of something that's wrong with them. They're too tall, they're too short, they're too fat, they're too skinny, they're too hairy, they're too bald, they're too pretty, they're too ugly.
I used to have a joke. How'd it go? It was something, I know the punchline, but I'm not recalling the setup. It was something like, I'm freakishly skinny, because there's a hole in my butt. So stupid. But the point is like, that was my single biggest insecurity. All growing up, I got mocked for being skinny. I didn't think any girl was ever gonna like me, and all of these things, because I wasn't a big, strong, tough guy, man. And
I had the same issue.
Yeah, and so and that was and when I got called names and things, it was always related to that. I was the skinniest kid in my class, and so that was something that was like this traumatic issue and a big insecurity for me. And so, as silly and dumb of it, which was kind of the point, it's still, there's a lot of kind of bravery in there to even, because most people, when they're insecure about something, they mask it, or they don't mention
They avoid it. Yes. Yeah, that's right. So, I used to wear clothes that were just much too big for me.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. I mean, part of it is because if you're long and lean like we are, it's hard to find shirts that have a long enough sleeve.
Yeah.
And then you end up buying like an extra large shirt and it just swims on you.
Yeah.
But it's not like that disguises the fact that
I used to get
lean.
baggy pants thinking that would make my legs look bigger, but it's just like people just see the lack of filled space they see all of that empty, like, draping cloth hanging off of your bones. It does you no service.
I don't miss the 90s either. Those pants were all the rage. So I think this is a neat idea because as I've studied in the humor research lab, we say that humor arises from benign violations, from things that are wrong yet okay. And self-deprecating comedy has both of those elements, right? You're pointing out something that's wrong, but what makes it okay is you're the one who's pointing it out on yourself. And so it's an easy path to a laugh. until I do it. And then, but then it also has this licensing effect, which is if I'm willing to make fun of my most insecure elements of myself, then I can make fun of everything else.
Yeah. I made fun of me first. That's an interesting take.
Yeah, it has I call it a sort of licensing effect. So
yeah.
So what's fascinating is comics are sort of honed in on this idea of what are my bugs, what are my problems, and how can I turn them into a feature, into something that actually works for me, not against me. And so I encourage people in business and businesses themselves to be on the lookout for their bugs and say, hey, can you turn them around into a feature?
What a breath of fresh air to see any kind of marketing that isn't just this like upsell, like self-aggrandizing.
New, great.
It's just like I mean, it's kind of like the banner blindness or whatever of the internet when every banner used to flash.
Yes,
and that would at first get people's attention, and then that flashing, just Pavlovian training, people learned to just completely ignore any flashing banner, and so it did the opposite effect. And we're kind of in that world with saying the best, the greatest, that sort of thing just doesn't really work or mean anything to anybody anymore.
And and so I think that's I think there's like opportunity. Of course, like looking at your bugs, they just may remain bugs, but sometimes they could be turned into a feature with a little bit of creativity. So
do you have like one example from a business that's used this?
Yeah. So I'll give you my favorite. I have a whole bunch in the book, but my favorite is Buckley's. So Buckley's is a Canadian cough syrup.
I don't. I'm a patriot, so I would never. I only drink American cough syrup. I like that. I'm gonna new business plan. I'm gonna start making hyper patriotic cough syrup to sell in America. That's a market that hasn't been cornered yet. Anyway, go on. Buckley's. What are they doing?
So Buckley's was sitting at number 9 in the Canadian
geez.
market.
How are we gonna get it up there? It's 9 right now, and I just don't. We got the best syrup on the market here. What the heck are we doing wrong here?
So for listeners who don't know this, Shane is from Wisconsin, so he's like half a step away from being Canadian.
Just scoot right on over there.
So if you're number 9 in the Canadian cough syrup market, you're not doing well.
What the heck are we gonna do?
And so Buckley's had a problem, and that is that the cough syrup tasted terrible, like truly awful. And so you could say, well, okay, maybe that's keeping people away because it's already aversive to have a cough and then have to take your medicine.
Yeah, throw some sugar in that.
Exactly, add cherry flavor and so on.
Please don't add cherry flavor.
And so. What did Buckley's do is they actually leaned into the bad taste. So they changed their slogan to it tastes awful and it works.
Oh, that's amazing.
Right?
Yeah.
The implication being it works because it tastes awful. Like cough syrup's supposed to be murdering these germs and viruses. The things that are doing that for you should taste like medicine.
I wonder how much. I wonder if this was just a fun, clever idea, and that was that, or if they also knew about kind of how the placebo effect works, because the placebo effect does, the more intrusive, the harder it is, the more the placebo effect.
It's more believable that this.
Yes, a more believable story.
Essentially, bitter pills work better than sugar pills.
Yeah, larger pills, that sort of thing.
There's so they had like sayings like "not new, not improved." So they really our largest size is 200 milliliters. Any larger would be cruel, right? So so it ended up becoming number 1 in the cough syrup market. Like it totally, by leaning into that bug and turning it into a feature.
Oh gosh darn it, we did it.
So that's a nice example of that thing. As a quick aside, speaking of that, there's a recent paper on placebo surgery. Have you heard about this?
Oh, the opening up the heart. And
this is a meniscus one that I read. So this is in one of these sort of Northern European countries that have socialized medicine. So they randomly assign patients who have a meniscus tear to either the typical meniscus surgery where they go in there and clean it up.
With the heart condition, they did this exact same thing.
And then they do one where they go in there and they kind of bang around, but they don't actually do the surgery.
Yeah, they just cut you open, sew you right back up.
Yes. And same results.
It's actually the heart one that was similar that they did. There was some they couldn't tell if some like new valve or something was working or hurting matters, and so they had the control group of doing nothing. They had the surgery group, and then they had the fake surgery group, just cut you open, sew you right back up. And the fake surgery group actually did better.
That's amazing
because the placebo. I mean. The placebo effect is not to be discounted. It's incredibly powerful. What the body can do when it believes you're like fixing it, or like attitude is just so important. I can't believe I'm alive with the attitude that I have toward life.
I should live till I'm 100 with my attitude.
Yeah.
It is interesting how we are such good friends, but are really so different in so
very
many
compatible ways.
Yeah,
I'd say
complementary.
Yeah, yin and yang.
Yes, and
you don't believe in yin and yang, so there you go.
You have a blank sheet of paper in front of you, and I have 3 sheets of paper in front of me filled with writing.
Well, if I think anything interesting, I mean, first off, I'm not gonna. If I think of something interesting to say, I'm not gonna wait till you're done talking. I'm just gonna spring it out there. You want this podcast to be nice and organized and flowing in this structured way. Well, I got some bad news for you, Pete. I'm going to throw a wrench in those plans.
Indeed. So why don't I let you do that? So
I'm all kidding aside. I love the idea of kind of going through from start to finish. And I mean, this is one of the many ways in which you benefit my life is by showing me the power of organizational habits. So there's other things like the first thing is reversing it. So comedians use reversals all the
time.
See what I did there?
I did.
You thought I was going to do that, then I did that. Boom. And usually they're better. There's a little self-deprecation on top of that. I know I'm tagging things. I'm really on a roll here. But the idea is you build an expectation and you have like the rule of 3 is a good example of a comic sets the premise. And then the second example builds an expectation. And then with the third example, you talk about your genitals. Sing and a little twisteroo there. That's what you want to do. You get people expecting something and then, whoa, you turn the other way. It's a classic comedy technique. Take my wife, please.
Yes. I actually have a Henny Youngman example in the book, which is so I'm going to give the listener a chance to see if they can be a comic. So the setup to the joke is when I read about the dangers of drinking, I gave up reading.
Boom!
Yes.
It's a great joke.
It's a good joke.
Fantastic joke.
It holds up today.
Yeah.
More than ever, actually, because alcohol is much more dangerous now than it used to be.
I'm not sure that's true.
The beliefs about
it. So comedians use this is like first year of comedy. Like you better have the reversal figured out within the first month of doing comedy, but our business is able to use this same technique. I mean, a lot of this stuff is kind of just about divergent thinking and thinking outside of the box, but this reversal is kind of one example of it, right?
Yeah, I mean, in comedy, it's everywhere. It's punchlines and premises. So, you know, the movie Trainwreck is a reversal in premise, which is you take the typical rom-com roles and then you just flip them, and you make the female role the typical male role, and vice versa. So I'll give you an example of this that I liked, which is Patagonia. So Patagonia, the outdoor gear company, they're living in a world where sustainability matters. That their customers care about sustainability. These are people who love the outdoors, love the environment, are concerned about climate change, and so on. And so all of these companies are trying to be sustainable companies. It's hard to be a sustainable company because you're making stuff and you're shipping stuff and so on. And so Patagonia ran this campaign called "Don't Buy This Jacket." And so they had a picture of one of their popular jackets with, in big bold letters, "Don't buy this jacket."
Yeah.
Telling people the cost to the environment of making the jacket and only asking them to buy the jacket if they truly, truly need it.
Yeah. I don't know why I'm thinking of this right now, but I just want any female listener out there to know that if you come to one of my shows, please don't hit on me after the shows.
I'm so glad you made that joke and I did not. So I think so.
Did I just get canceled? Come on, that was adorable. I'm harmless.
It's not a bad one. So the idea is thinking in reverse. Is, first of all, I think the average comic sort of naturally does it, but as you said, if they didn't naturally do it, they learn to do it very quickly and learn to internalize it. I think the average person, as they think about their career or think about their business or think about their problems, they don't naturally think in reverse. And it's not guaranteed that thinking in reverse is going to cause you to come up with a creative idea. But when you do, it's likely to be highly novel, right? It's because if the whole world is always thinking, how do we lower prices? How do we lower prices? And you think, well, how can we raise prices? It gives you a chance to start thinking differently than you would otherwise. And it should be clear that this is not a book about being funny.
Yeah.
I mean, you might learn some tips or tricks.
It might be funny. There's some laughs along the way, and it's entertaining. But it's definitely not at all an instruction manual on how to be funny.
I actually tell people
lessons about the world of from the world of comedy about doing. And by the way, as you're talking, you say it's business lessons. I think a lot of this is stuff people could use in their individual lives, just in terms of thinking outside of the box, and even just like, everyone wants to stand out. They want their lawn to stand out. And they want their wardrobe to make an impact. And like a lot of these kind of divergent thinking, reversing it kind of things, they can be applied to so many different aspects of life, not just for like the small business owner out there.
I agree with that.
Yeah,
I agree with that. I think like, I've pitched it as a business book because I've been trying to bring my day job as a business school professor and my night job decoding comedy together. But I agree. I could have come up with a different shtick to something idea.
I mean, what can't this book do? Can be a coaster. You could use it for self-defense.
As we see,
you could warm yourself in a real distressing situation. When you're done with it, you could just start a campfire with it. There's so many things, and this is exactly what this is kind of what comics do, is seeing like lots of other uses for things, and businesses could help from benefiting from this too. There's a lot of like academic tests like this of like giving someone like a paperclip or something that, and asking them to name the various different alternative ways in which that they can use this, and like children are really good at it, and adults suffer from this.
Yeah. So one of the things that Shane did for me was he pushed me to put more science into the book. And so there's something called the alternative uses test. And it's a test of creativity. And what you do is you take an everyday object, a brick or a paperclip, and you put it in front of a person, and you give them like 2 minutes to come up with as many uses for this beyond the obvious one, clipping paper together or, building a wall. And then you basically have judges who judge the number of ideas and their kind of complexity and creativity. Mm-hmm. And so you can give someone a score how good they are at this. So it essentially simultaneously measures persistence, right? So you work harder, you get more uses, and then divergent thinking. Mm-hmm. What's fascinating about this is that comics, as Shane just demonstrated, are really good at this. Mm-hmm. So this
and prisoners. A prisoner might get your book and they're using it to hide the shiv in. Maybe you have LSD on one page. You could tear out a page, turn it into a paper airplane to send a note across the hall to the next cell.
Now Shane's showing off. So what's fascinating is this graduate student at MIT did his doctoral dissertation on creativity. And in particular, looking at comedians' creativity, and he, in a study, he pitted comedians against professional product designers in the alternative uses test, and the comedians won. So not only did they come up with more examples, and then part of this is because they did come up with more examples, their examples were more creative.
I wonder how much of, and this is like somewhat funny, somewhat serious. Thought that I'm having right now. I wonder how much of this is like naturally somewhat creative-ish person or a person that has developed their creativity over the years, however you want to say it.
A skill. They've developed a skill.
I don't get into nature and nurture stuff as a false dichotomy, but I wonder how much of it is like just desperation too. Like comics are pretty broke. When you're broke, you're living within these really strict constraints, and you do just by nature need to think of some really creative solutions. I know my friend Steve Gillespie has like jokes about why you should steal food from airports because they're ripping you off and stuff like that. And that's like a joke that I don't remember how the joke goes.
Sure. It's the kind of joke that only a comedian would come up with.
It is very funny, and it's also something that like derived from real life being broke and on the road and whatnot.
I have a bunch of, and I don't know what to do with them. I have a bunch of lessons that didn't make it into the book, which I like to say is a good sign because you get the best stuff. But one of the lessons that didn't make it into the book because I think it's bad. But it didn't make it into the book because I couldn't decide if I agreed with it or not. And it was originally called No Plan B. And it's not for comedians who don't use condoms.
Yeah. No, I get it. I was one of those guys. I mean, my plan B was go back to factory work, which I was not going to do. That was not a plan B, or make it work. And so you're working within these constraints. And I mean, I think it's an important, I think
we should be clear just for people who haven't picked up on it yet, is the idea behind No Plan B is, I have talked to many comics who said, if I hadn't made it as a comic, I might be dead. Like, right. I didn't have anything to fall back on. If I didn't make it as a comic, I wasn't going to make it as a human being.
Right.
Versus the person who does have a plan B, they're working in an office and then they go out and do open mics. You know what I mean? They have something to fall back on in terms of career, money, lodging, housing, opportunity, and so on. And I just couldn't make up my mind about it. But you clearly are a no plan B person.
Yeah, absolutely. To my detriment in a lot of ways. I do, the opposite point would be, I know I met this comedian, and this is like what I would tell every comedian to model their career after. I met this comedian who featured for me at this club. It's a good club in Grand Rapids in in Michigan. I'll actually, right around the time that this is coming out, I'll be going through their headlining. It's a fantastic club, and the guy featuring was a guy who has, he's a digital nomad, has a great computer job that he can work from anywhere. He's a pretty funny comedian, doesn't need money from comedy, and has the freedom to go, and he only takes the gigs that he likes. So he's at this club and featuring's the gravy spot. It's the easiest way to get laughs, is that middle spot. And
so there's an opener, a feature act, and then a headliner.
And opening a show is hard. Closing a show and being the main event is a lot of pressure and hard, and a lot of expectations. But featuring is like a really gravy spot, and you can experiment a lot. And
you actually write about this in your Shtick to Shane. The book.
I don't even remember that part.
I think it was when you became a headliner, you said that you stopped taking big risks.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And because the pressure's on, and now if you don't get asked back, and if you take a few chances in the feature spot and the club owner's looking and it doesn't do well, they might kind of be amused by it and respect that you took chances, because they know it's not killing their show.
Right.
Whereas the headliner, better be funny. This is what people are going to come back for.
Yeah.
And so do you want to work at that club again? So it's easier to just be safer and take fewer chances. And this is all related to something that I kind of wanted to bring up that we didn't talk about in the book, but is really related to the book, because I think that the person buying this book is not like Warren Buffett or something. I mean,
no.
Bill Gates does keep up with most of the things that I'm doing. Old Gatesy and I, we go back a ways, but I think it might be a lot of people that are kind of interested in starting a small business or something, and are working within the constraints of having not a lot of resources. And with that creates opportunity you're going to be better off taking a lot of chances. You as a small business person can take way more chances than Coca-Cola can.
Yes.
In many regards.
Yes, definitely. So this issue of, I agree. So I wrote the book for sort of two styles of reader. One is the person who's sort of working in a kind of traditional corporate culture and looking for an edge, looking for a way to be better, to enjoy their work more, maybe pivot out of it. And the other one is for a startup founder type, someone who's very entrepreneurial, who just wants a different perspective. And, this issue of no plan B came up in the world of entrepreneurship on my other podcast. So I have this podcast called Solo, The Single Person's Guide to a Remarkable Life. And I talk to two entrepreneurs. It's launching right around now also. And we talk about, when do you go all in, essentially, which is the opposite. When do you decide I'm quitting my day job and I'm going all in? And what they said, which I thought was correct, is you should be paying attention to the market. Like when the market is responding so favorably to your product or service that you can't ignore it anymore. That's the moment. Versus, I'm going to quit my job and I'm going to start this candle business. Right? It's fine to start a candle business, but do it on your nights and weekends. And then when
the demand for your candles is so much that your work is interfering with it.
That's right. Then that's a good time to sort of do it. And I think there's probably a parallel in comedy.
Absolutely. I went from doing open mics, starting to showcase and stuff, and then I could kind of feel like things were going well for me and moving in the right direction, and I was starting to get those first pay gigs and making I think I was maybe making like $500 a month or something like that, like pretty quickly, which is by the way, I hope this gives you pause before getting into the world of comedy. This was
great.
Like record setting to be making like $500 a month, like as early as I was. Like so many people were so jealous of me, and so I immediately then went to temp work, because some of these gigs were traveling for 2 hours for like a Wednesday night show or what have you, and then opportunities started popping up where maybe I could fly somewhere and do like a Thursday through Saturday gig. And so I went from full-time employment to temp work that allowed me the flexibility to be able to be mobile. And then actually, oh my gosh, here's something that like I told you about in the writing of the book, but it wasn't applicable to anything for the book, but it's just a fascinating story. I was working as a security guard.
Yes.
At a construction company. I've told this story so few times that I'm sure my listeners haven't even heard it. And so I was working construction at a temp construction for a construction company. I saw these security guys doing nothing. And I was like, how do you do that?
I'm good at doing nothing.
And then they're like, well, we'll give you a job. I was like, great, sign me up. And so I start doing this like, basically, it's a sham security job. It was for this construction company to offset their liability costs, like contractually with the insurance company. They needed to technically have security there,
even though nothing was insecure.
And so this drove down, the money that they saved on insurance was more than the money they're paying for security. So they got it just for that. So like my instructions were to just not get caught sleeping, not to not sleep, not get caught sleeping. But they didn't even want me to talk to. They're like, if you happen to see someone maybe stealing something, like let the supervisor know, but don't even like bother these guys. Just stay out of their way. It was as simple as that. And so it was like I would write and I'd also like drive off and go and do comedy shows and stuff because I pick my own hours. I'd take the overnight shift. But anyway, the first night.
Can I interrupt for a second?
Yeah.
Because I think I don't want to lose this point because I know you're going to get to a punchline here.
Yeah.
So this is actually part of one of the lessons in the book.
Yeah.
Is the idea that comedians not only are humanoids, that they see things differently, but they're also willing and that they will break rules in order to not only make things funny, but in order to make comedy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. And so,
and it's also just like all of like government and legal systems and stuff like that. They just don't make sense to comedians.
Yeah.
Like all of it's a joke to us.
So I have this story it's a fascinating story in the book. One of my previous guests on I'm Not Joking, her name is Claire Downs.
Yeah.
So Claire is a LA-based comedian, writer, and so on, who hasn't made her big break yet.
Mm-hmm.
So she takes these temp jobs also to make ends meet.
Mm-hmm.
But she will not let the temp job get in the way of her comedy.
Mm-hmm.
So she has all these hacks that she has come up with that allow her. So first of all, she gets to work and she does the temp work as quickly as possible. And then she starts her real job, which is writing comedy. And so,
well, a lot of these temp jobs, you're just like, they're just retaining you there in case they need, like sometimes something comes up and they need another body.
Yes.
And so you're mostly just twiddling your thumbs, waiting for like an emergency situation to arise.
So she has this thing called, my favorite example of this, she has this thing, she calls it her go bag. So when she packs for work, she takes a big backpack and puts her comedy stuff. Excuse me. She puts some stuff in that big backpack. Then she puts a small backpack in the big backpack. And in the small backpack is her comedy stuff. She gets to work. She does her temp work. Then she leaves the backpack on the back of her chair. She puts a coffee on her desk that's half full. She strews some candy wrappers. And then she takes the go bag and she goes somewhere and does her comedy work. And she tells like some story where she's like, oh yeah, I once pitched a meeting in Beverly Hills and everybody at work just thought I was in the bathroom. So this is, your story is reminiscent of that, right? You're just like, oh, I got this job where I didn't have to really work. And so I could do my real work.
They didn't want me to work.
Yeah. That's even better.
Yeah.
You don't even have to be deceitful.
And so I was the first night so this construction site, it had all these big apartment buildings and it was also on an old haunted insane asylum. So all these kids used to sneak up there and drink. This is before the construction project, and so there was like some movie made about it or whatever, about how this place was haunted. So this is a big party area before the construction moved up there. So anyhow, the first night that I was on Conan, and then I'm making my late night debut. I'm still working this temp job at the time, but I took off to go down and do Conan, of course.
This is Hollywood.
And then I go, and I'm on, and then I find out the next day what happened was some kids snuck onto the property, were partying or whatever, having beers and stuff, ended up going into one of the unfinished buildings, turned all of the gas on like a 3-story building, and it exploded. Not only did it explode, but across like 100 feet away, all of the siding, all of the windows and stuff on the next building and another building. I mean, it was a monster of an explosion. A cop sees this explosion because it's up on a hill.
Yes.
A cop sees this explosion, puts on his lights, comes flying up there. He's radioing it in, calling the fire department and everything else. Yeah, and he gets up there, and there's the security guard's just sleeping in his car with this huge fire going on behind him, and that would have been me. And then they looked into this security company. You know, they didn't have the exact like proper licensing and stuff.
I'm sure.
After all, and
we know how good the security checks are.
And they dissolved. And we're no longer a company. And then I found myself out of work after my first Conan set because of that, and that's when I became a full-time comedian. So it's not just the market. Sometimes there's just these right opportunities,
yes,
that arise. But that's in an age where you might have a side gig going on, and then one day you get laid off.
Mm-hmm.
That's sometimes the perfect opportunity for somebody. They can collect unemployment for 6 months or whatever, and get their baby off the ground.
Yeah, I'm not a religious man. I don't believe in fate, but I do believe in paying attention.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it seems like the world's speaking to you.
Mm-hmm.
And so that we can thank those rowdy kids.
Yeah.
This idea of kind of breaking rules in order to be successful, to make it work is not just a theme in comedy.
So there's some companies that have employed this.
I think you find it more on the kind of entrepreneurial side.
Mm-hmm.
When you think about the failure rates of new business, they're so high.
How high are they?
It depends on how you measure it, but 90% plus failure rates. You know what I mean? So
yeah.
And as time goes on, those failure rates go even higher.
Mm-hmm.
It's easy, it's easy to stay in business for a month, but stay in business for 3 years, it's hard to do.
I mean, if you like break even your first year as a company, isn't that just like considered tremendous?
I think so. People think about how long people complained that Amazon was losing money.
Mm-hmm.
Uber still loses money,
mm-hmm.
so on. So you think about how hard it is to be an entrepreneur, how hard it is to come up with a great idea, how hard it is to escape the competition, how hard it is to just make enough money, to survive, so to speak. You get into these situations where you might have to kind of bend the rules a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
You have your own version of the go bag, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, Sarah Blakely was a door-to-door fax salesperson. So this gives you an idea of how long ago this was going on. Sounds like a pretty terrible job.
Yeah.
So she had one of those classic "there's got to be a better way" moments where she had a pair of pants that basically would show panty lines. And so in order to avoid this, she took like pantyhose and she cut the feet off of those, and it was kind of smooth the look for her. Well, that turned into Spanx, right? These sort of compression style undergarments that are
changed my life.
Yeah.
My figure is so much better since the invention of Spanx.
To give you an idea of how valuable Spanx is as an idea, Sarah Blakely is a billionaire now. But as genius as it all seems, it wasn't easy for her to do. So, for example, she got lucky. So all of the producers of like pantyhose, hosiery and so on were all men. And she couldn't get anyone to make it for her because they just didn't see the value in it because they had been doing hosiery a certain way for so long. One of them basically was at dinner one night and has 3 daughters and was like, oh yeah, I had this meeting with this entrepreneur. Of course, no one used the term entrepreneur back then. That's a new term, you know. What do you think of these? And the daughters were like, oh my God, you need to do this. Right. So there's your dose of luck. Then when Spanx launched, she contacted everyone she knew, like even people she hadn't talked to since like 4th grade, and asked them to buy the product. And then she would send them checks in the mail to reimburse them for their purchase, just to create some velocity in the eyes of the retailers. And then one thing, once she realized was like, I think she was working with, it was Neiman Marcus, I think, which is a great store to get into, but they put Spanx in like the pantyhose department. And she was like, my customer doesn't buy pantyhose. They're not even going to go to that part of the store. And so when no one was looking, she took the product and she moved it to the cash registers of the store where people would sort of happen upon it. And what happened was the people working the cash register assumed that she must have permission to do that. And you put it in front of the cash register, people saw this, and, you know, as you might imagine, these women were like, this is genius. Oh my God, this solves, you know, this problem.
So basically for any listener, what you should be learning from that whole story is if you want to help us out, go to your local Barnes & Noble, find the Shtick to Business, take those, bring it to the cashier and arrange them in front a little bit.
Well, I think it's even worse. I don't think I'm going to be in Barnes & Noble. So what we need to do is have people bring it in and try to buy it. And be like, we don't have this in stock. You need to have this book in stock. So, I'm curious. I don't think I've asked you this in private, Shane. Do you have aside from the ones that we've already talked about, did you have a particular lesson that you kind of liked? Oh, geez. It was the, it was the response. It was toward the end, man. It was the response. It was like the email response of saying that you're probably going to not like that. This is one of my favorite lessons, but saying no,
like how to tell somebody no.
Yes. Okay. Yes.
Was like incredible because you are really great at phrasing things in a way that's like it's bordering on deception, but it's just like put in a really good like professional way. It's like, oh, okay, I can't argue with that, but
can I? I'll give.
Yeah. This might change a lot of lives. I mean, this had an impact on me.
All right,
and I need a refresher too because this is a good reminder for me to start implementing this.
Okay, more. I'll give you the lesson, and then I'm going to give you a little bonus lesson that didn't make it into the book.
Oh, fantastic.
Okay, so I have these things called act outs. So these are kind of mini lessons. They weren't big enough to make a chapter out of, but they weren't small enough that I felt like I could overlook them. So the last act out in the book is called Getting from Yes to No. And in it, I talk about how when you're young in comedy or in business, you're carrying a spear. You're just looking for opportunities. Everything's outbound. And it's like, you know, hey, Shane, you want to be on my show? Yes.
Absolutely.
Shane, do you want to be on my podcast?
I'm begging to get on an open mic.
That's right.
I'm signing up. I'm waiting for the slight chance that maybe I'll get picked to be on this horrific show.
And then what happens is, and I think you're there in your career, frankly.
Yeah, I'm one of the better open micers out there.
No, I mean, you get successful enough that now things start becoming inbound.
Yeah.
You start getting lots and lots of requests and questions and so on.
Yeah.
And so my argument is you have to trade in your spear for a shield. And the one of the best shields is just simply saying no.
Yeah.
And the problem is the average person is really terrible at saying no. Mm-hmm. And so so the way the average person says no is they say something like, I'm terribly sorry, but I'm just way too busy these days. Maybe you could try me again in a month or two. Mm-hmm. Something like that. Mm-hmm. I can't do it. Well, there's multiple problems with the way you're saying no. One is you're inviting the person to ask you again. Mm-hmm. Secondly, you're inviting the person to judge you negatively.
Right.
Because you're saying, I'm sorry. And which suggests that you've done something wrong. Mm-hmm. And then when you say, I can't do it because I'm too busy, if you blame your busyness, now it seems to the person like you're out of control, like you don't have control over your life. And so it hurts you in multiple ways. Mm-hmm. So my suggestion is, yes, you acknowledge that this is an opportunity, a good opportunity in the eyes of the person requesting it. So say, Shane, thanks so much for thinking of me. I'm really flattered. Okay. So you acknowledge this was a good opportunity. However, unfortunately, or something like that, but unfortunately, I'm unable to
Unfortunately,
do it.
You're recognizing that for them this is bad news.
That's right. I'm giving you bad news. I know it's unfortunate, but I'm not apologizing. Mm-hmm. I'm acknowledging but not apologizing, and I'm unable to do it. Which means now we're not negotiating here.
Yeah. That's so fucking good. and I oh man, I gotta send that to my assistant too. And the thing is like that's one of those lines. Here's one thing we have in common, where I'll sometimes break something down like that, like a trick that I used to someone.
Yes,
and then they'll say to me what I'm going to say to you, which is, I'm glad that you use your powers for good. And because that is fucking clever, and there's a lot of people that have a lot of clever tricks like that to deceive people, or for nefarious.
I say I'm using it. I'm actually using it for it's doubly good.
It's benefiting everybody.
That's right. You leave with a no, but feeling good about it.
And I have things like this because I have listeners that might be like, oh, I'm starting a podcast. I sure would like Shane to be on my podcast.
Of course.
Yeah, I love hearing him on podcasts. What a great guest. This would be a big get for me. And unfortunately, I'm actually not saying no. I'm saying I have some ground rules. You need to have been doing your podcast for at least a year. You need to have at least 50 episodes. You need to have experience under your belt. I need to listen to it first. And those are things that I've implemented. This is an example of a shield that I have put up fun. because otherwise, as I'm sure any listener can imagine, there are some people out there that have taken advantage of my time, and I'm like, I have a hard time saying no to people, and I'm like, sure, you seem well-intended, and like, oh, okay. And then I end up having an exceptionally awkward conversation with this person that it's clearly like one of their very first podcasts, and they were not ready for this, and I'm trying my hardest to pull all the weight for them, and it's making them look bad, it's making me look bad, and this shield's protecting them as well.
It's doubly beneficial.
And it's so Peter, one of the lessons.
Wait, hold on. I'm going to give the
bonus. Yes. I know. Let me set it up.
Oh, please.
One of the lessons. One of the act outs is start strong and stronger. So let's give what stronger way to finish the episode than by have a bonus that isn't even in the book. This is it. if you aren't listening, if you didn't get a chance to listen to this podcast, then you're also missing out on things for whatever I'm trying to say here. Let's clean that up. What am I trying to say? I'm trying to say this is a fantastic bonus that in addition to getting this book, you are what are you?
I'm ready. Let's clean that up so we can edit this out.
Oh yeah. Jimmy, clean that up. That's what I do.
Really? Oh, nice. Okay, so this special bonus is built off of getting from yes to no, and it goes something like this. So if you feel really bad for this, I'm unable to do it response.
Mm-hmm.
What you say is, thanks so much for the opportunity. Unfortunately, I'm unable to do it. I'm spending my extra time on my secret project.
Oh, that is good. That is good.
And now, of course, I believe everybody should have a secret project.
Yeah, I have so many secret projects. I wouldn't be lying in saying that.
I just launched one recently.
Yeah.
I worked on that secret project for a year.
Oh my goodness.
And
that is so good.
So, A, get a secret project. He's writing this down. A, get a secret project. You owe it to yourself, especially if you have even a touch of entrepreneurship in you. And B, you lean on it because when you start saying no to things because you're working on your secret project, guess what that makes you do? Work on your secret project.
Yeah. Oh, gosh, that is so good. Well, this is fantastic. You are welcome, listener. This is a terrific episode. This is the third time you've been on the Here We Are podcast, and is this my second time on... I
don't think you've been on I'm Not Joking, have you?
This is my very first time.
Well, I had to get 50 episodes before you would say yes.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you, Peter, for joining me and also letting me join you on this cooperative dual podcast. This is a lot of fun.
It was fun. I'm glad we did it.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, listeners, for being such a wonderful, curious people. Do you have like a little finishy thing that you do on your podcast?
I don't. I just thank my guests and say cheers.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to visit petermcgraw.org for more information about our guests, show notes, and social media links. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share with others. Join Dr. Peter McGraw next